last week, as you know, we've had Bryce Edwards on the show. I think Sean's probably had him on more than I have. But Bryce is a Victoria University lecturer who has set up, first of all, he set up the Democracy Project, which was really about openness and freedom of speech, really, leading up to the last election. And this time he's sort of, we talked about it a little bit about before, got new funding, moved in a new direction, and has set up something called the Integrity Institute, which essentially, I mean, one man's integrity is another man's, favoritism, but nevertheless, the concept is really for openness and transparency. I think that's the best way of looking at it. That are people, particularly those engaged in the political process, gaining, shall we say, immoral or unethical ends as a consequence of not having openness and transparency applied to them. And so Bryce Edwards set up the Integrity Institute. One of the things he got involved with was just last week was a fascinating case to do with a member of parliament, a first-term member of parliament from Wanganui, in actual fact, National Party MP there called Kel Bates, having a large amount of property that he didn't declare under his MP's register. Now, it's a real beltway issue to a large extent. I don't imagine most New Zealanders really care too much about this. It is a beltway issue, there's no question about that, and quite prosaic if you're trying to deal with sending the kids to school and the cost of living and how you're going to be able to afford, your warrant of fitness now, you've got need 2 new tyres, all that sort of stuff, all right. But nonetheless, it is a fascinating story about, is Parliament one of the prime institutions in this country that is immune from the kind of inspection that, well, frankly, most of the rest of society is? And to join us about that, Dr. Bryce Edwards joins us now. Bryce, welcome to the show. Love to have you on. Thank you for joining us. Well, he would be here if he was here. No, well, there you go. And somebody's just, well, you go and find him, and I will go look at the pitiful It's all right. Josh's just working on getting that link back up again. And I'm just on the perjury issue. Look at the pitiful consequences for perjury and sexual assault cases. Yeah. And another says, I sat in a rape trial as a corrections officer. During cross-examination, the victim came out and said she'd made it up. The entire thing was thrown out. A man had been in custody for nearly 2 years, lost his job, lost his relationship, lost everything. No perjury charge was ever laid. Madness. Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. That is exactly what I'm saying. All right, we've got Bryce, but we've got him on the phone, unfortunately. Bryce, welcome to the show, mate. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hi, Michael. Sorry about the audio there. I don't know what happened there, but
that's all right. You're here now. That's good to have you. Listen, you would have heard my introduction. I know it's a beltway issue, and I think you'd admit that yourself, to do with Kel Bates, but just take us through it, will you? Because it's sort of fascinating all the same, and it does raise a whole series of other questions. But how did you get involved in this issue?
Well, let's take it right back, actually, Michael. So since about the 1980s, 1990s, throughout the world, I think there's been a public desire to have a bit more transparency in politics, because there's been a sense that maybe we're being ripped off by some of our politicians who might have all sorts of vested interests. They might have conflicts of interest, and they might be, making laws that suit themselves. And so that's something that's happening throughout the West. And so there's mechanisms that are being brought in democracies to try and give the public a bit of sense that they can trust the politicians. And so here in New Zealand, in about 2002, I think it was, well after your time, Michael, there was this register of pecuniary interests that each year the parliamentarians have to say what they own, what assets they have, whether they have any other jobs that they're earning income from, whether they've been given gifts by anyone above a certain amount. I think it's $500. And it just is there on the website, and probably hardly anyone looks at it, but it just means that the public can know whether MPs actually have any conflicts of interest. So they're allowed to own as many houses as they want. They're allowed to receive gifts. They just have to be upfront about it. And so I think there's a bit of suspicion that if you take something like the housing crisis, that maybe parliamentarians aren't actually losing from things like rising house prices or rising rent prices, because a lot of them own rentals, a lot of them own houses that they are selling. And so, in a sense, it's a beltway issue, but in another sense, it really does relate to those suspicions that, whatever government's in, whether it's a Labour government or a national government, they don't actually have an interest in what normal people are having to fight with, because they're on big incomes, they've got all these assets. So at least if the MPs have to front up and say how many houses they own, etc., there might be a chance for the public to decide, well, are we being served well, or are MPs making decisions on housing that really help themselves? So that's, I think, the background to this. But of course, you're asking more about Carl Bates, and of course,
No,
this
can
is
I just before you carry on, you and we will carry on this one, Bryce, but I'm really interested in the concepts you raise, because as you probably are aware, in local government, every elected member in local government, whether they're just a relatively minor community board member of a community board somewhere in deepest, darkest Southland, has to declare a pecuniary interest or a register of pecuniary interest themselves. All right? And that's a statutory responsibility that falls upon all local government elected officials. But, and here's the but, they also are required, if there is something that a policy issue or that comes to the council table that is related to those interests, to declare a conflict of interest and not to take part in the decision or even the discussion of. Why isn't that a requirement at national level as well?
Look, I'm impressed by how local government does this. I'm not sure if they do it well or not, but the concept is a good one. But no, that doesn't extend to our parliament. They vote on all laws, and there's not a sense that parliamentarians need to declare these things or leave the House when these things are being voted on. And it would be very difficult to implement that. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but, MPs are voting on...
let's try the landlords one, because let's try the landlord issue.
Yeah.
We know that National changed the law. Okay, Labor changed the law and National changed the law when it came to tax deductibility, I think, to do with interest for landlords, people who own property as a commercial operation. Now, if this was local government, there'd be no way in the world that anybody who owned or stood to benefit from a change in legislation one way or t'other would be allowed to speak, let alone vote on that, because they would have a clear conflict of interest. Surely that must apply to our members of parliament as well.
I think the argument would be that that's all well and good at local government level, because local government only deals with a more narrower sort of number of lawmaking issues, whereas Parliament deals with everything. And it could lead to paralysis if, everyone had to declare everything.
No, it would just mean that what you do is you go and shove everything in a blind trust if you get into public office, and off you go.
Oh, look, that's actually a good argument. I think that's a different one, that MPs would actually have to relinquish control over their assets while they're making those decisions. That's different from them having to step out of the parliamentary debate and not vote. Certainly there's questions about this at another level of decision making, which is cabinet level, and there are stronger rules there about conflict of interest and so forth. And there's more debate about that as well in Australia at the moment. There's big debates about whether government ministers should have to get rid of their business ownings totally if they're going to be in government, so that they shouldn't be able to own shares, they shouldn't be able to be part owners of business. And I think that is the way the world's moving at the moment. I'm not sure it's going to happen quickly here, but certainly, there's a huge, rise in concern around the world that things are broken, that countries are broken, economies are broken, and we're looking for solutions about what's caused this. And a lot of people are increasingly pointing at the politicians themselves as being part of the problem.
Like I say, what's good for the goose is good for the gander when it comes to local and central government, it seems to me. Listen, the other thing, though, to do with Carl Bates is that He is the Member of Parliament for Wanganui. Now, Wanganui has very cheap real estate in comparison to most provincial centres and cities in this country, which is, ironically,
Yes.
in part, one of the reasons why people are starting to move there, because they can actually afford a house. Um, Cal Bates and his family, which I think is his mum and his dad, or his mum and his sister, own something like 20 odd houses. Not all in Wanganui, throughout New Zealand, but obviously real estate investment and business is what he was doing before he came into Parliament, and it makes him, obviously, and his family, a good amount of money. What's the problem here? Why didn't he declare that in his register of interests?